Right. So I started off by thinking to myself, okay, why is there such a big Jewish population in Gateshead? Like, why is there probably, why is nothing near me? Why is it when as soon as you go in there, you see them constantly, and it's like, okay, I look into it a bit, and you see this mass migration in about, I believe, the 1800s. 1800s. I'll get back to that. But so when you see that, and you begin looking the certain places in Gateshead, right? And one of the places I found was a place called Hellgate. It used to be called Hellgate, but there was a fire there. There was a fire at this place called Hellgate at the same time as the Jews, and then it became Hellgate. Right, okay. And then also, if you look into the name Gateshead, because I started thinking to myself, oh, that's a weird name. Where's that come from? One of the meanings is goat's head, like ball. So then I can look as well, like stuff like the bridge. Stuff you think, the bridge is very strange, but then you also see that, oh, this is linked to a place like New York, right? And I think is when you play other place called Hellgate, that's a very striking name, Hellgate. So then I see in New York there's another place called Hellgate, a patch of water, I believe. And so not only was there a fire in the Gateshead there, in Gateshead with Hellgate, but the Hellgate there was also fire near there. So I thought, okay, this is very strange. So then we can look as well, there's another place called Hellgate as well. Like a mountain place, right? It's like a volcano, obviously it's called Hellgate because of that, but that's very strange, isn't it? So then I'm kind of naming the end of that. But then a few weeks later, I'm watching a video from Mine Unveiled, and he brings up, he's talking about the Bowling Club and stuff, and he brings up Hellfire. I'm like, Hellfire. I was like, oh, that reminds me of Hellgate a bit. I'm like, and you see some connections with Hellfire, but that's all about Hellgate. And I remembered something as well. Is that at one of the World Fairs, there was a place called Hellgate, and if I remember correctly, the fire originated from that Hellgate there as well. So fires and Hellgate, that's all connected. That's really strange, isn't it? And at the World Fair as well. So that's that. But when I'm watching this video, I'm on my way home. I'm thinking about, and I remember passing by a Mason Lodge, and I think to myself, has anyone ever tried to attack these? Anyone, did it ever happen to them? Because like, I don't know, because like you think of them as like, obviously it's like all powerful, but I'm not saying they are, but you think about that, I started looking into it, and then you start seeing fires like all around the world. I mean, Sonic Lodge, and that's very strange. And I remember, I'll have to double check the name, I'll probably put it in, but one of them happened in the 1800s at the same time as the Chicago fire, and I'm like, Chicago fire, like, the Great Fire of Chicago. And I was like, okay, that's very strange. Another fire, okay, move it to that as well. Very odd. So I began looking, I'm like, and I started thinking to myself, Great Fire, and I looked into that. There's one in London as well, obviously, the Great Fire of London. I remember thinking a while back, thinking, that's very odd how everything with the Great Fire of London, which that Mind Unveiled video also goes into, but you answered a few questions about that, like, because it was the fact that, the amount of deaths was suspicious that we had started was very unclear, and I was like, Basically, he gets into how basically it almost seems like a cell, right? Because where the monument in the Great Fire of London is, and what's in it, like a secret laboratory and a telescope. That's very strange, the monument for that. And, like, just stuff's around that, like, you should probably honestly watch a video because it's better than me, but, no, but then, so it's almost like a great reset type thing, do you know what I mean? That's very strange, right? And I look, so I'm starting myself, I'm like, okay, let's look at other great fires because there seems to be a few now. That's very odd. And first of all, another thing I found was one in the Newcastle Gateshead area, and I'm like, okay, this is getting very strange now. How does this all begin linked together, right? But if you look all around America, there was great fires in essentially every single city. and world fairs there as well, all in the 1800s, right? I'm like, this is very strange, all linked in the Hellgate as well. Like, what? And then you realise this is all some great reset, right? Essentially to bring in, their wills and things like that. I was like, this is getting very strange, you know what I mean? And, what I began to realise was, this is a very common thing, because again, if you look into stuff like the Bull and Club and how, essentially it was a fraternity for people, this is Britain and US, obviously you have similar things, Skull and Bones in America, but here in Britain, and obviously one of the initiation rituals is essentially going to a fancy restaurant and destroy stuff, and obviously they use the money to pay out out that you go take the money, do you know what I mean? Because basically it's like you can do whatever they want, which is very strange. It's almost like we can do this, we can get away with it, but you can't do it. That's how powerful we are. But it's not just that; it's the buildings that target as well. All the buildings. I can't remember the exact grading. I think it's something like great one, but the point is like read all buildings like from back in the day, right? And this begins to link in the stuff like the destruction and fire, a lot of fire as well, right? And you realise that they're essentially main way of working is essentially destroying things and, putting their thing back on top of it. So destruction, creating from that destruction, bringing, and it's like, you see this pattern all the time, and which again, the reason I bring up the Hellgate thing is because you see this pattern so often. And it's not, and I realise it's not just physical, it's also like the mental and with beliefs and politics, everything they're trying to do to reset everything, reset the new world order, all of that, and it's like, what? But linking on the Hellgate, the reason, another thing that's strange about, because I began to look into stuff like, portals and things like that, because I remember watching a thing on the Grand Canyon here that was like, potentially a Stargate and how there's all stuff surrounding that, and I was like, okay. And I remembered Hellgate as well, okay, this is very strange. And then recently I saw a thing for Mountain Graham, and I was like, okay, this is, something with the dots here, there's something going on here, so I begin to look into it. And you see, like, there's stuff around different mountains, and all these, many places which claim to have portals or something like that, are also essentially volcanoes, or either way, mountains, essentially. And it's like, okay, there's something at least to this, even if it's not, So there's some strange thing going on there. And like again, even if you look in the Bible, you see obviously, for example, the Tower of Babylon, trying to go up to heaven and become gods themselves and stuff, and that's like, okay, so there's something there about high places and God and gods in general, and you even see it like in the Bible after that as well, where you have Mount Sinai, Moses going up the mountain to meet God, Jesus' transfiguration on the mountain. So there's clearly something there in the spiritual, and I even saw something the other day, I think, from Michael Heiser, where he was talking about something similar as well, and I was like, that's very odd how that's, not on that recently. But he's on about, things like Jacob's Ladder as well, obviously the spiritual, angels and stuff coming up and down and in and out of heaven, and that's like, there's something there. I mean, I don't have this definitive, concrete thing I'm just sharing what I've discovered so far. It's very strange. I've got a lot that I'm going to share, like, on other things as well, but this is like one of the things that really kickstarted us off it, again, because, I was on a lot of stuff before, like this year, but then there was a couple of year gap where, but yeah, like a lot of stuff that I've been researching, noticing, things like that, and there is a lot more I've got, but this was just the business starting point, because I thought this was a pretty decent discovery and seeing how they operate, basically, because believing and linking to the fire, the sort of phoenix symbolism, like rising from the fire and stuff, and something being created anew from fire in the ashes and stuff, they use it all the time. You see the symbolism a lot, and I think it's important to understand how it operates, and I think it's equally important to figure out, well, what's the end goal. I do want to discuss things like that, and essentially, you know, just what's going on. Basically, I think it's very important, you know, because if this is really happening, then I think it's important for people to know and to deal with. I think like lots like this back in the day when I first started looking in this, before I had my period of where I was like, no, I'm just being crazy, you know, and I'm just being yeah, as I said, just being crazy, and no, I've got to just, I'm like clearly developing schizophrenia. To be clear, even recently I thought I had schizophrenia. That's took for another day. But I was looking, and I don't have any of the early signs of schizophrenia, like even stuff as simple as socialising. I don't do a lot. I'm spending time with family, friends, partner, everything like that, right? So I'm like, no, I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not crazy, you know. Because I've been questioning myself a lot as well. You know, someone who's crazy doesn't question themselves. They just go, right, this is reality. No, you know, it's not for me. No. And then obviously with lots of coming up recently, it's like, no, I was right all along. Do you know what I mean? But this isn't a pat myself on the back, you know, stroke my ego. But no, I'm just, you know, make it clear that the reason I'm doing this is because back in the day, you know, this was one of the things that helped me. Aside from realise everything going on in the world, it was also a case of a big step towards becoming a Christian. You know, because I think it's you know, you see all this evil on these practices, like there's evil practices in the world, and you see it in the Bible and from long before, and clearly there's something working here, you know, something's clearly happening because of these, you know, like fancy rituals and things like that, do you know what I mean? And communication with supposed spirits, you know, I'll say it in air quotes, but you know, I believe it is. So you've got to think to yourself, you know, if that's the case, then does not mean this is more likely, because this is saying this is the origin of these things and how they came to be. So therefore this is happening one that. Therefore listen to that. But yeah, I don't know, I think it seems a bit odd, but I think not, do you know what I mean? But yeah, I think that's everything anyway, really, I've got for this video anyway. I'm gonna have a lot more that I've been looking at, discovering, and things need to be said.